So today I'm going to be talking about the 2005 movie Son of the Mask, directed by Lawrence Guterman. So if you look at the front cover of this movie, you're going to notice that neither Jim Carrey nor Cameron Diaz are in this film, and that this film is 11 years after the original film of The Mask. And you have to wonder, well, what happened? Well, it turns out that after many rewrites and revisions to the script, a lot of time passed in between the final draft and the original draft, and Jim Carrey said to hell with it because he had a lot of other bigger projects on his plate, and Cameron Diaz became much more of a star in the 10 or 11 years or so, and they were a lot more expensive to recruit. So they ended up going with a different kind of class in terms of actors. You have Jamie Kennedy and Traylor Howard. Now, Traylor Howard I actually like. She is the assistant in Monk, like in the last like 5 or 6 of the 8 seasons of Monk. She's Tony Shalhoub's basically caretaker, keeping him sane and clean. But you have Jimmy Kennedy here, and he can be good. I do like him in the movie Scream. He seems to be that guy that ends up being the very meta one, and making sure that the audience gets that the writers of Scream are in on the joke of the horror movie trope. All right, and I haven't really seen Malibu's Most Wanted, but I know that's one of his better regarded pieces of work. Certainly not this movie. Um, Going from Jim Carrey to Jamie Kennedy, in terms of moving from one person who has the mask to another person who has the mask, ugh, those are some big shoes to step into. They really are. Really, the biggest thing about it, the mask and how it worked, was that even with all of its zany antics, Jim Carrey could really work with the character, and he had his whole stand-up routine, and he was one with the mask. Here, you have this mask coming to fruition into what's known as Fringe City. Yeah, okay, the name's kind of funny, but it's very far out from Edge City, which I guess is the joke. But anyway, you have the story of an animator, and to be fair, his name is Tim Avery as opposed to Tex Avery, one of the big creators of the Looney Tunes cartoons, and there's quite a bit of homage paid to this actually. You have the dog's name is Otis as opposed to Milo in the last film. You know, Milo and Otis, hardy har har. It's clever. I like it. I at least laughed. Uh, but you have this wife who she doesn't really have much of a character at all. All you really know about her is that she wants to be pregnant. Why? What's the big deal? I mean, yeah, you have this couple that encourage you to have kids, but who cares? It's not your problem, you know. They shouldn't be the ones governing your uterus. I just don't get that. Okay, and this whole story that follows is all about how they end up having a kid, and because Jamie Kennedy found the mask and wore it to a Halloween party as opposed to a swanky nightclub, and he had the drive to make whoopee with his wife. Uh, the kid is born from the mask's sperm, I guess. Ugh, it's just so convoluted. Um, the real problem with this movie is that it it still has the same kind of zany aim as the mask does, but where the mask knew it was aimed for mainly mainly adults with some antics for the kids. It kept a mostly adult feel, and it didn't insult your intelligence in terms of where things moved. And on top of that, you just had a much more sympathetic character in Stanley Ipkiss in The Mask as opposed to Tim Avery in Son of the Mask. When Jim Carrey's character um, was being too much of a pushover and things just were not working out for him, I genuinely wanted him to succeed and to kick their ass in terms of everyone that did him wrong. Here, I didn't care. I didn't give a shit about Jamie Kennedy's character. He was obnoxious. He was just whiny. When I was actually sitting down and watching this movie, I didn't really understand why everyone hated this movie so much in terms of why it's so bad and why it's so awful on this list. It seemed fine. And then that's when it hit me, you know. It just seemed okay. And when it wasn't okay, it was awful and just weird. And not a good kind of weird, just a bizarre, like, you're despicable, you're creepy, as opposed to, oh, that's new and different and fun. It's a bit of a contrast. So, aside from the fact that you have a new director and a new set of main characters, you can really tell that this movie is different than The Mask, just with the way that The Mask character himself even has his comedy routine, or really, there isn't really one in this movie. Jamie Kennedy doesn't really do anything with it. He just looks like someone that just has a green mask on, as opposed to a whole new person. The way Stanley Ipkiss truly transformed himself, and that's where it really becomes an issue. If you're not even laughing at the parts where it's supposed to be funny, how can you endure all the melodrama that somehow manages to be even more melodramatic than the stuff in The Mask? That just doesn't work at all. Something else that this movie has in common with some other awesome movies, such as Epic Movie, is Cal Penn, Kumar from White Castle. All right, and he has a relatively minor part. He kind of eggs on Jamie Kennedy's character to go talk to their boss because he's working as the torpedo tortoise or something, whatever. And Jamie Kennedy ends up doing it anyway, even though he has really no idea in terms of what he should be doing. But he ends up making a big hit of this Mask character, um, coming up with all these wacky creations when he puts on that mask. And here, being turned down for ID and then coming back into the party, it's just not as elegant and not as rewarding as it was in The Mask. And now you may be wondering, hey, why aren't you judging this movie on its own merit? Well, because it's a sequel, damn it. And on top of that, my first thought was to judge this movie on its own merit. And that's probably why I thought it was fine. But when you're riding off the coattails of a movie that's as well done as The Mask and trying to capitalize on Jim Carrey's oneness with The Mask without having Jim Carrey, you're going to have some judgment in that department. And even the female lead is virtually non-existent in this movie. You know, at least with Cameron Diaz, you understood that she was just a singer trying to get by, but that she had a soul outside of her chest, you know? Like, yeah, she was smoking hot, but she had something of character and personality to her that Cameron Diaz did. That Trailer Howard, or Tanya as her character is, she just didn't really have it. You know, it's hard for me to even remember Tanya. I only remember that name because it stands out in general as opposed to having this movie do the work. You know, it's not because of this movie I remember the name Tanya. So as I said before, uh, the Mask and Tanya end up making Whoopi, and they have a baby from the Mask, and he, even in the pregnancy, that's when it starts to get weird, and it only gets weirder from there. You know, she eats silly string, bubbles come out of her mouth for no real reason. It's not even funny. It's just odd as opposed to funny. The baby shaking maracas in the ultrasound. Okay. But when the baby's born, it gets even more annoying because it's consistently hateful against Jamie Kennedy's character. And yeah, I think he's an ass, but it doesn't mean the baby has any reason to think that. Why? What makes him so aggravated? What what's he so mad about? It just doesn't make sense. And then on top of that, you have Otis, the dog, who keeps digging into the mask. Otis has more of an arc than this damn baby does, because Otis had his own room, and then the baby ended up taking over his room. I don't know why a dog has his own room. He should have had the doghouse, like it ended up being halfway through the movie. But he should have had that doghouse from the get go. Whatever. I don't know why I'm bitching and moaning about this movie. Well, okay, I do, but you know, I guess I want to save you from the torture of watching this. And of course, you have Alan Cumming as the character Loki. Now, there is some Norse mythology from the last movie, and they didn't talk about that, so I was intrigued in terms of having that answered, but Loki is creepy as hell in this movie, and the visuals. That's the real problem with this movie. The story is fine. The characters are fine. Most of these things are just fine, but the real problem is that these visuals, they're, you know, for a movie that's supposed to be about kid things and being aimed at kids and having a baby that does all sorts of goofy things and having a dog that does lots and lots of goofy things when he puts on the mask and the baby being creepy on its own, it just, ugh, it's just more nonsensical, and I don't have really any sympathy or empathy for it. It's just stupid. But there's not even the good counterbalance of Jamie Kennedy's character actually having any substance. He's clueless as they come. He's so dumb. It's it's aggravating. Anytime Jamie Kennedy's character is on the screen, you just think, aren't you going to learn anything? Any slight percentage of a thing? Are you going to learn anything whatsoever? No, I guess not. Okay, fine. He always leaves the baby in front of the TV. He tries to feed him broken glass once. Ugh. And then the baby's eyes pop out. Again, like I said, these visuals are just. Whereas in 1994, in The Mask, they really fit the mood in terms of a banker being genuinely turned on by this jazz singer. Yeah, that made sense. And the movie was PG-13. It was aimed for adults. You know, you could get away with more of those kinds of jokes, and they were actually clever and well done. Here, the movie's PG. It's supposedly aimed for kids, but not only does it try all these more adult jokes, but they're not funny and they're gross. I mean, you have this one lady turns into a mucus head. What? What? Like her 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 head turns into a nose, and it's because of Loki, and Loki talks about how she's a nosy neighbor. Ah. Probably one of the nastiest jokes out there is when Jamie is trying to change his baby's diaper, and he pees a little bit. Yeah, babies pee. That makes sense. And then he starts peeing like a fountain and having three different streams, and then there's an entire explosion of pee that pummels Jamie Kennedy as if it's the scary movie. Really? It's one thing to have a pee joke, all right. To have one, really, like one, and then but you keep extending it, and it's not only not funny, but it just doesn't even make sense. Like, or I don't even want to finish that question, But how? How was that possible? Really, the creepiest thing about this movie, though, is Loki. He pops up as a green bee and infects this nurse so that he can gather some birth records, and then he goes and visits these people's homes dressed up in all these odd jokes, I guess. You have a plumber with an obnoxious butt crack. You have a Girl Scout with headgear, like the whole line outside the mouth, like for the wire. Uh, and he he's supposedly on a mission to gather this baby, because he wants to please Zeus, played or Odin or whatever, played by Bob Hoskins. Uh, it's one thing to redeem yourself in the eyes of your father, but Loki just comes off more as a pedophile than someone trying to make things right with a mask. It doesn't feel like he's actually on a quest to recover something that was stolen from him. It was just his weird fantasy being carried out. It's just nasty. And on top of that, he doesn't realize that this baby, Jamie Kennedy's baby, is the kid until he pukes up like like the scene from The Exorcist where homegirl Reagan pukes green, and then Alan Cummings like, well, shit, that's the baby, even though the baby was acting, ugh, God, was overacting, and I guess the baby was CG. The thing is too, all the things that they try to pull in this movie just come off as creepy, whereas in The Mask they came off as cool. It's just a big difference between the two. And if you don't want me to compare it to The Mask, then maybe you shouldn't make a sequel to The Mask. So is there anything that I actually liked about this movie? Oh, of course. For one, it is fun to see the mask back in action. I just wish that there were more cool things to be done with it as opposed to scary things or things that didn't insult my intelligence. But when Jamie Kennedy is the mask, he has some pretty cool moments. He just doesn't really have that oneness with the mask character that Jim Carrey did. So I guess that's like a slight plus. It's just good to see the mask back again because even a diluted version is still a good version of the mask. I like Trailer Howard. Her character's really not given that much, but I like her when she's in the movie. She actually seems sensible, though I don't know why she's hooked up with this schlub of Jamie Kennedy. He's a pain in the ass. I liked the dog. I liked how he had an actual arc in terms of having his room taken away and how he seeks out vengeance against a baby and ends up forgiving it eventually. Ends up going on dates with his dog Venus. That was kind of funny. You gotta have something to laugh at in this movie. I did actually kind of laugh at the nosy neighbor joke. I thought it was creepy looking as all get out, but I liked the joke. Sometimes they had a few other jokes that were talking about like do this the hard way, and then there's a box literally named the hard way, or this way, dummy, when they're asking about which way to go. It's worth a laugh. Um, I appreciated that this movie was trying to do very weird things. You felt like there was some effort being put into it to try to replicate that adult feel that The Mask had. Except I think this movie mixed up adult and cool with adult and the more innuendo and perverted kind of way. This was more creepy and less suave and smooth and fast talking, gun toting, like gunslingers or shooters or mob people or whatever. It didn't really capture like the Al Capone gangster feel. It captured more of the creeper, to catch a predator kind of thing. But I think that this movie just had a number of things against it from the get go anyway. Not having Jim Carrey come back, that's just a swing and a miss. I don't even know if it was a swing. I think it was just an intentional. Well, yeah, I'll just say it. It's a swing and a miss. You didn't even try. You didn't even try. It's like you just swung and you just knew you were gonna miss anyway. You didn't even like let the ball go through the strike zone. You just swung anyway, even though you knew you were gonna miss it. But Jamie Kennedy sometimes he has his good moments. Sometimes they're rare, but when they happen, and they're good. He does a good job at the end of the movie repairing Loki and Odin's relationship with one another, telling him that he finally learned his lesson about being a good father, so maybe Odin should do the same. And Jamie does actually become a better father as a result. Thank God. But you know what? There was so much room to improve. Of course, he had to be at least a little better. You can go from being 3% good to 8% good. You've more than doubled your percentage of good, but you still have a long way to go. The animation was really creepy, and considering this movie was supposed to be for kids, it just didn't make sense. I wasn't really as creeped out as I might have let on, but I'm just thinking if I showed my kid this, he'd probably she'd whatever it would probably be scarred, at least scared. Um, this movie just really isn't that good, and the transitions I haven't mentioned yet, but the transitions in this movie were just bizarre. They would look at the baby and then they would zoom into the baby's eye and then Odin would come out and you're just like what the hell. And there were at least two or three other transitions that were just as awkward if not more awkward. And you have Loki essentially being a pedophile. That just is not okay for a kids movie. I mean, what are you gonna tell you? What are you gonna tell your kids? Like, hey, that stranger over there, he's a great guy. You should go get into his van. Yeah. Well, but the biggest disappointment about this movie was that it was a sequel to The Mask, a fantastic movie with Jim Carrey and Cameron Diaz, a movie that had a compelling protagonist and a wonderful female lead to complement him, and a relatively entertaining villain. And this movie just really didn't have that. Loki was sometimes entertaining, but he was more creepy. He didn't have enough um really evilness that didn't feel childish. I This movie wasn't hard to sit through when I watched it, but the more and more I thought about it in the days after, the more and more aggravated I became. And especially when comparing it to The Mask and really thinking about all the different attributes that it had. There was so much material that could have been worked with to make that sequel. I understand that Jim Carrey's story was pretty much complete, and it was good to move it on to another person, but have a person that's likable, have a character that the audience can get invested in and root for when times are tough. When when he attempts to feed his baby broken glass, I would rather have the reaction of, "Oh, you must be extremely exhausted," instead of, "Oh, you must be quite the idiot." You should have a protagonist that you root for, or at least one of those kinds of antagonists that seem to be popular these days, like Bryan Cranston out of Breaking Bad, or like an anti-hero. At least have a compelling anti-hero if you're going to have someone villainous that we're supposed to root for. But yeah, I I ended up giving this movie a D plus, and that's under Who's Your Caddy, that's under Disaster Movie, but it is above Epic Movie. It was at least better than Epic Movie because, as you know, that is a very, very hard accomplishment to have in your life. It is hard to be better than Epic Movie. I mean, it's just so epic. All right, this was much needed. I've been waiting to do this for a while, and I'm thankful that I am able to put all this together. And this is actually a lot more fun than I ever give it credit. This is very enjoyable to do, to rant and rave up about these movies, because in the end, it's just an hour and a half of time that you get to spend really dissecting what's going on. But in terms of the quest for the best and the hunt for the rut and the Waldo's wacky world of film, I'll be looking at The Shining. I'll be looking at Click. And in terms of my next hunt for the runt, I haven't officially decided yet. But I'm probably thinking something like the Pinata Survival Island. Or, you know what? I will just have to really think about it. And if you have any recommendations, let me know in terms of which one I should do next. Maybe consult the bottom 100 and then we'll talk. All right. Well, I'll see y'all later. Y'all have a great day now. Bye.